Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Tensions between India and Pakistan continue to escalate as there are continuous cross-border firing and mounting death counts on the line of control. Also, testimony to the seriousness or the gravity of the situation is a recent conversation between US President Donald Trump, a call that he made to both Prime Minister Modi of India and Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan, urging essentially both leaders to calm down. Now, also the situation as it is, we are well aware, we've been following it, you've been watching it on just not news coming out of India and Pakistan, but across the board is very volatile indeed. And the question we're hoping to shed some light on with our panel of guests is whether in an atmosphere this volatile and so hostile between two nations, can there be any kind of bilateral talks, or the UNSC informal consultative meeting can have any trickle-down effect, essentially, where the international forum can have a kind of a reining in of these two nuclear power states. Without further ado, let me introduce the guests who are joining us for comments today. We have with us Mr. Ravi Srivastav, analyst, joining us from Mumbai, and also Mr. Salman Bashir, former Foreign Secretary, joining us from Islamabad. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for taking out the time to speak to us here on Newswire. If I could start with you, Mr. Bashir, let me first get your take on what you make of US Donald Trump's announcement earlier today on Twitter about this phone conversations he's had with what he has called his two very good friends.
Well, thank you. First of all, I think I have seen just the readouts, from the White House and the tweet by President Trump himself, and what has been given out by the Indian side on the conversation. Fact that the U.S. president has spoken to both Pakistan and India, and caution and sort of suggested that both sides exercise restraint and calm down the situation. I think it's something. It reveals the fact that the U.S. as well as the international community remains sort of concerned about the situation. We don't know really what was discussed in detail, but certainly I think this is a helpful sign so far as the U.S. is concerned to sort of, get a bit more interested in what's happening in this part of the world.
Okay, so Mr. Srivastav, what is your take on this? Do you see that it is a positive move forward? Will it have any effect, this phone call that took place between the US President and the Prime Minister of India and Pakistan?
Ayza, I see it like that a few days before, if you recall, that President Trump said in US, while meeting Pakistan Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, that Mr. Modi had requested him sometimes before in some foreign shores that he should mediate in the Kashmir issue. Now, that was vehemently denied by the Indian side, by Indian foreign minister. But nonetheless, Mr. Modi did not say anything about that whether he had invited the President US to mediate between India and Pakistan. But fact is that something like that had happened yesterday, and another 30-minute call, although there is no audio clip out anywhere, but then it appears that President Trump must have told both the sides what is mentioned in his speech today, that he has talked to two of his good friends, and he has requested them to not to escalate any tension.
Not to escalate any tensions and to diffuse is something that comes in at a time where there has been an increasing number of those laid across in cross-border firing on the LOC. Mr. Bashir, this comes at a time just after the Defence Minister of India made a claim that essentially highlighted that they no longer would adhere to the no first use policy on nuclear weapons. Is this just political rhetoric, or do you think that statement actually hit a nerve with the US president that could have initiated this conversation?
I think, yes, of course. I think the Americans would be concerned, on the way the situation is going. The drift is very obvious. So far, it's rhetoric. And of course, there has been this exchange of fire on the line of control, and these statements, like one made by the Indian Defense Minister, also have contributed to heightened tensions between Pakistan and India. But I think besides this, what is for us a bit more worrying is the actual ground situation in Indian held Kashmir. The curfew, the siege, and what we are seeing in terms of video clips and reports which are being sneaked out, filtered, maybe after some difficulty, show a very, very grim situation. And I think that aspect is one which is much more worrisome.
The human rights aspect you're talking about is definitely worrisome. But Mr. Bashir, let me ask you this. The situation is right now between two countries. Not only are they nuclear armed, but their agendas politically led by their governments are very different. Here we are looking at a BJP-led government which epitomizes the RSS ideology, the Hindutva ideology that doesn't look at Muslims very fondly. I mean, this is not just a sort of a comment. This is seen as evidence from the number of lynchings are the highest in the BJP-led government and various other examples. This kind of a situation, is there a reasonable expectation, evidence for any bilateral talks to even begin?
As for now, I don't think that is on the horizon. I think now or in the foreseeable future. Bilateral talks for what? I think what needs to be done is to first of all, ease the situation inside held Kashmir and allow the Kashmiris a modicum of normalcy in their lives. I think that is the primary thing. The primary objective should be to sort of persuade or whatever the Indian government to show some speck of humanity. As far as the other issue is concerned, whether we get into some sort of talks, I think that comes later. Of course, Pakistan is amenable for talks anytime, but we see that the Indian side remains adamant, and I think for now, essentially the focus is and must be on easing the situation in held Kashmir as far as the Kashmiris are concerned.
So you're seeing it as essentially the first step should be easing the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. Let me come to you, Mr. Srivastav. Your take on this. What is the sentiment like within India? We understand from various reports and speaking to journalists there, analysts there, that there is a mood of celebration after the revocation of Article 370. But in terms of the unfolding humanitarian crisis where essential liberties have also been stripped for the Kashmiris, what is the sentiment like towards the BJP government?
Sentiments are mixed. Sentiments are mixed. You rightly said there is a celebration in one part of the people, one part of the group, one part of the particular political party. But the fact is, if you recall, in Indian Parliament, the opposition leader, the Congress opposition leader in the Parliament, Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary, made a specific comment regarding Kashmir. And he said that Kashmir has been turned into a kind of a Nazi camp. So that's the situation here. And the things are very, very confusing because whatever government media is giving a picture that everything is normal in Srinagar and Valley and Kashmir around, but the kind of picture presented by the international media is totally different. And we are seeing different video clips over there. In India, there are voices. I hope you have read about one Shehla Rashid. She has tweeted some 11 tweets yesterday regarding the situation in Kashmir, that how the army entered into some houses, pulled up the young boys and taken them into detention without any record. So, so that, if somebody is eliminated tomorrow, you don't have any record of that who was arrested and who was not. So entire streets of Kashmir are on every 10 feet you will find a security person over there. So situation is definitely very, very confusing. And as far as this Article 370 removal is concerned, the section of the people in India believe that that should have not been done arbitrarily, like using a brutal majority in the parliament and passing the bills in the upper house and the lower house and implementing it. Instead, there should have been a resolution from the Kashmir Assembly, J&K Assembly, which should have been brought to the center and acted upon. So there is no confusion about it. As far as talking to Pakistan is concerned, I hope you can recall the Indian Defense Minister's statement yesterday, where they have categorically said that there is nothing, no talks or negotiations as far as Kashmir is concerned. So that kind of sentiment shown by the government, but we are totally in dark. The 80% of the restrictions still in place in the valley, in the J&K, and the things are, the internet, the cable TV, the media persons, all are, restricted. There are no fair reporting happening from the Kashmir. We are totally depending upon the international media at the moment.
International media, and also dependent on how the international forum reacts to this situation. Mr. Bashir, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, has spoken to in the past 2 weeks alone, including the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, to various leaders, which includes foreign ministers from France, Spain. He's spoken to OIC members. He's spoken to Malaysian leaders. The fact is that every time the response has been that we are observing the matter closely, it is of grave concern, the human rights violation. Mr. Bashir, where does this go from here? How do you see this situation getting any better? What moves that Pakistan needs to do in order to highlight what the ground reality is at the moment?
Well, you see, in the present day situation globally, if morality is dead or dying, there is nothing much that Pakistan can do to whip up and wake up the international community on the grave human rights situation in occupied Kashmir. There are certainly, Pakistan has been trying to sort of do its best. In fact, it's the international media, as I pointed out, showing graphic videos of what's happening on the ground. So we have not seen that sort of, a strong enough response from governments, important governments, governments of important states, especially in the West, who usually are very vocal on human rights. But if that is the case, which it would seem like that, and given the sort of mindset that we see on the Indian side of this particular government, then everybody is looking at the ground situation in terms of the Kashmiri reaction. And if these reports are even 50%, accurate at the sort of barbarity that is going on, we expect that there will be even a more stiff resistance by the Kashmiris themselves. And that will create a dynamic in the not too distant future, which nobody will be able to control, neither India nor Pakistan. And I think it's sadly going in that direction. And I would have thought that, for instance, the ICRC, the International Red Cross, ought to play its role under the Geneva Conventions. The human rights organizations, especially those bodies which are in charge of providing humanitarian assistance, would step in and, cater to the requirements of the ordinary Kashmiris. We don't see that happening in an adequate manner as of now.
We don't see that happening in an adequate manner. Thank you so much. Speaking to Mr. Salman Bashir, former Foreign Secretary, speaking to us from Islamabad. Here, I'd like to welcome another guest who's just joining us. We have with us Mr. Ashraf Jehangir Qazi, former ambassador, also speaking to us from Islamabad. Mr. Qazi, just talking to Mr. Bashir there about how does one navigate from this point on, especially after a phone call from the US President Donald Trump? He spoke to Prime Minister Imran Khan, he spoke to Prime Minister Modi. Of course, there are analysts, there's a lot of speculation of the fact that Prime Minister Modi was the one to reach out to US President Donald Trump here. Irrespective, do you feel like this phone call is going to shift the situation at all?
Well, this depends on what the intentions of Mr. Trump are. Mr. Trump made his point of view very clear when our Prime Minister visited recently and said that Modi had asked him to arbitrate or mediate. And he inquired about what, and he was told emphatically about Kashmir. And our Prime Minister answered very positively that if that was done, then that the whole world would be grateful for this action. India rejected it. Now, all the, the White House and the State Department and others have tried to play down the statement of Trump. And Trump actually did change his tone to some extent, saying, I can only play a role if asked by both sides. That goes back to the traditional position. So how is that consistent with his statement that Modi approached him to say this? So then everybody says, well, Trump is Trump. In other words, the man lies. Now he's spoken to both prime ministers and he wants to, diffuse the situation. If he can, and then the only way he can is to get the Indian Prime Minister to revise his decision of August the 5th. Is that likely? Is it possible? Can Modi even do that without sort of sustaining almost permanent political damage to his prime ministership and his political career? And he is able to defy the United States. The United States is not threatening him with any sanctions, and he's already won an election on the basis of Hindutva and his image as, against minorities, particularly Muslim minorities. And about Kashmir, he's long advocated the policy he's now implemented. So I'm not optimistic that Mr. Modi will back away from his August 5 decision. And if he doesn't, then how will the situation be diffused? Is Pakistan expected to accept the new status quo with reports coming in that Kashmir is under lockdown, so many thousands of people have been arrested and sent to other parts of India, and we don't know what the casualty rates are, and this is a situation that is likely to escalate as soon as they lift the lockdown, which they're going to have to, because you can't sustain that on a permanent basis. And even if they do try and prolong it, it will be like an admission that something awful is happening there. Mm-hmm. So Pakistan has played its diplomatic hand so far pretty well, but not with much success, which is no fault of ours. That's the result of the attitude of the international community, especially the major powers. In the UN, we got tea and sympathy, but we didn't get much else. And there's no statement came out of it, and no indication of any further action to be taken by the United Nations. Well, we can go and approach them ourselves again if the situation deteriorates in Kashmir. But in Pakistan, I see that opinion is also divided. There are many who say we can't harm Pakistan because of Kashmir, no matter what the Indians do to them. And there are others who say that, well, that's our jugular vein. It's essentially part of us and our being. It's the unfinished business of partition, etc., etc., etc. Right. And if we just abandon them, then it'll be a matter of great shame. But my own view is that if we are going to be so cautious, that we can't take risks because so much is happening. Our economy is weak. We're being threatened by FATF. It's being threatened by IMF. We're being threatened by Western countries. Then we should have the decency to inform our Kashmiri brethren that we can only do so much in these circumstances. Please sustain your struggle, go up and down, whatever it is, and all survive, keep it going, your political rights we will always back with the fullest diplomatic action and whatever other action on each and every occasion and we will take other actions too, but there's a limit to what we can do. Let's be very frank then with them, instead of kind of leading them on in the expectation that if India escalates its atrocities to the point of being almost genocidal, that Pakistan will then jump into the field.
Right.
Because the answer to that is, will we? And there's a division of opinion inside Pakistan. Many liberal intellectuals say we shouldn't even think of it. And there are many others who say, no, we must, if necessary, go to the fullest extent to defend the rights of people whom we consider to be our own. So that's the situation today.
That's the situation. And you talk about the possibility of the revocation, the reversal of the revocation of Article 370. Mr. Srivastav, if I go to you on this point, considering the kind of economy that India is facing, the kind of slowdown or the recession, as we've just heard the former governor of RBI also say that it's very worrisome what India is going through. And then at the same time, we see the Hindutva ideology at its peak during the BJP government, especially what is happening in Assam in itself. There are like about 3 to 4 million citizens who are essentially facing tribunals, who have been delisted, have not been included as part of the National Registry for Citizens. Do you think there is even the remotest possibility that Prime Minister Modi, for the sake of the betterment of what he calls looking out for Kashmiris, could consider this?
Ayza, the first thing is that so far the government of India has claimed that not even a single bullet has been fired in Kashmir and not even a single life has been lost in Kashmir. I pray God that comes true and no untoward incident should happen there. The lives are more important. The humanity is more important than anything else. Now, coming to your point, I consider it a diversionary tactics by the ruling BJP-led government in India. They are facing a precarious economic situation in the country. There is a huge unemployment. The auto sector, the telecom sector, the infrastructure, everything is almost perishing. And there are huge debts with the bank. The banks are almost sinking. And there is a serious unrest in the country. The younger population is very, very upset with this because there are no jobs. And to divert the attention of the people from such a core issue, the government especially has started this Article 370. And you rightly said that NRC, some 3 to 4 lakh, 30 to 40 lakh of people are going to miss their inclusion in the NRC. And there also they are making it a communal issue, that those people who are from the majority community will be accommodated, but those from the minorities will be excluded. So this kind of situation, it is purposely being created. It's my thinking that they want to divert the attention of the public at large, that so that people don't think about the other things. There are other unrest also in the country. There's the mob lynching issues there. Some minority community and majority community as well. The both lynchings are going on. The law and order is in a very bad situation. But to divert the people attention from that, they are pursuing this agenda, because Kashmir was the only minority. Minorities were in power there. They were the only minority-ruled state in the entire country. So they were
the only Muslim majority state.
Majority state, and this was the agenda right from the elections, that we will abrogate the Article 370 and the Section 35A, and we will be taking over the Kashmir. This kind of things they have been saying for quite long. So they are just appeasing their electorate by saying that, look, what we had promised, we have fulfilled it, something like that. But what they have promised on the economy, what they have promised on the welfare of the society, what they have promised on the development has not been met yet.
So you're talking about a diversionary tactics there, Mr. Srivastav. Stay with us. Let me also introduce another guest who is joining us from Istanbul, Analysts, Ms. Ruwa Shah. Thank you for taking out the time and speaking to us. You, as I understand it, have personal connections very close to your heart of what is happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Tell us a little about, have you been able to be in touch with your loved ones, who they are, and what is the struggle that, what does it mean for you, this struggle currently in the worst blackout in the history of Kashmir?
You're right. It's very close to my heart. We have been living in this situation for the last 75 years, and since the time I grew up, since my childhood, we have seen the conflicts very closely, because my father being in the politics, my grandfather being in politics, we have seen it very closely, and we have had interactions that that were at times so dangerous and so life-threatening, and we have lived through the worst. But it's not only us; it's most of the Kashmiri people. When I talk about my childhood to others, then I say that no, it's not only me; it's everybody in Kashmir. We all have been direct or indirect victims of the atrocities committed by Indian state in Kashmir. And this is not only now that we are seeing this blackout, and now the news is international and everything. Our daily lives forever have been such. We have never lived a normal life in Kashmir, and
Right.
today Article 3 abrogating Article 370 it might have given a new turn and twist to the conflict. But the point remains that Kashmir is a disputed territory where thousands and millions of people have lived a very difficult life. Thousands of people have died and have been killed, and there are so many other atrocities. And now is the time to solve the issue. By hook or by crook, we will never succumb to any kind of pressure,
Right.
whether this blackout or whether other atrocities that are being done. The people of Kashmir will never succumb to any kind of pressures.
Ms. Shah, we talk about the international community, whether it is standing up to this huge, outrageous humanitarian crisis. Is it doing enough at this point, considering the UNSC had an informal consultative meeting something like half a century later, and this conflict's been going on for 70 years? There is an understanding this is an indigenous movement. The current clampdown is creating a pressure cooker type effect. What are your concerns in terms of the next few weeks, and especially during the BJP tenure, the next few years, about how this matter will be resolved?
I mean, the international community is not really doing as much as it should be, but we can't also expect anybody to do a lot, because India is a very powerful state and it has friends. All the countries, all the powerful countries that are running the world out right now are in very close circles with India. So we can't really expect all of them to speak up, but at least the Muslim countries, like Pakistan, what it is doing, or Turkey, for example, or the Organization of Islamic Countries, all those organizations have to really put more efforts, and efforts that are really effective on the ground. Please go beyond the statements. Please, everybody, to all of those who are involved or are concerned about the people of Kashmir. Just go beyond the statements. Mere statements will not work. We have to take effective steps that will make India at least realize that people of Kashmir do have some backing. They are not alone.
You're talking about effective steps from the international community to bring to attention not only the kind of atrocities unfolding in Jammu and Kashmir, but also to bring a stop to what India is doing. Mr. Qazi, if I could get your comment on this. You heard Ms. Ruwa Shah talk about go beyond the statements. We're talking about a country that is already poised for one of its greatest recessions in recent history. We're talking about India. We're talking about OIC countries that make up 57, 56 countries make up the OIC. We've seen US Donald Trump show interest in this. Is it so unrealistic to expect any kind of sanctions, economic or otherwise, to bring a halt to what is happening here?
For the time being, unfortunately, I do think it is unrealistic to think that the international community or any of the major powers, or indeed some of our regional organizations, including OIC, will do much more than, lamenting the situation verbally, but will not consider taking action, because India is such a huge country, as was said, huge market, and its investment in many countries is very considerable. So there is a great economic tie-in with many of the countries, and So they don't want to jeopardize those business interests.
I understand. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Qazi. I understand that point of view, that it's a huge economy. It's a huge trade partner with so many of those, not just in the Middle East, but also the West. But let's not forget, this is also the country that holds the third largest Muslim population. It's not just what is happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but across India, the kind of atrocities that are taking place against minorities, especially Muslims. Isn't that enough to sort of wake up the West or the UN bodies to take any kind of action?
In a sense, that is happening. If you look at some of the international media, the articles are being written, editorials are being written in a way that was not the case previously. And there is a lot of talk about this is not the India of Gandhi or Nehru, which was admired so much by the international community. Maybe in Pakistan we had a few reservations, but the international community by and large held the India or the idea of Gandhi's India, Nehru's India in very high esteem. Modi has impacted very negatively on that appreciation. And so articles, informed opinion, elite opinion, specialist opinion is impacted. But when it comes to, particular interests and economic interests are very important when it comes to policy making. They do influence policy making, and there is a huge reluctance to do much more than symbolic measures or councils of restraint, etc., and to de-escalate the situation. I don't think anybody at this moment is seriously thinking in terms of actions like sanctions or boycotts of anything and all. And the great fear is here that India recognizes that it can neither reconcile with the resistance in Indian-held Kashmir, nor can it easily crush and suppress them, as the younger generation of resistors is indicating. And therefore, a lot of people are counseling very desperate, even criminal measures, that, well, if we can't do this, we can't do that, we're certainly not going to give up, and we'll escalate to such a proportion that will overwhelm, and that can involve colossal mass human rights violations. What would the world do in such an eventuality? First, we should avoid that eventuality as much as is possible. But if it comes about, and India seems to be making it clear that it will not let go of the valley in Kashmir, no matter what the state of opinion there is. So, I mean, it's a big power. It makes that kind of statement. And, of course, the other party to the dispute is Pakistan, and India and Pakistan are both nuclear weapons countries. Prime Minister has indeed sought a peaceful way out of this through dialogue and a principled compromise, but the April 5th decision seems to have thrown that possibility out of the window altogether.
Absolutely.
The question of dialogue with Pakistan has been reduced to nothing.
So if the question of dialogue is out, Mr. Qazi, thank you so much for giving us your insight there. Let me come to you very quickly. We're running out of time, Mr. Srivastav. The question of dialogue is out. And you talked about how there is a parallel, we can see a disturbing parallel between Hitler's Nazi Germany party and then Nazi Germany and what we are seeing BJP's Hindutva, RSS-led India. Do you think that the current scenario, the kind of picture it is painting in the West, we heard Mr. Qazi talk about how editorials and news coverage is showing a side of India that was never seen before. Do you think that is going to have an effect that might change Modi's policies on Indian-occupied Kashmir?
My viewpoint is that this action is being resisted in Kashmir. It's a fact. And my prayer is that soonest possible, the Kashmir should be handed over to the Kashmiris. And there should be elections. There should be a proper leadership. There should be the elections. There should be assembly in place, and they should decide that what they really want to do.
So
but instead
Kashmiris
of,
should be able to decide what they really want. Thank you so much, Mr. Srivastav. Sorry for cutting you there. We've run out of time, and with that, we'll take a quick short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Gross domestic product, or GDP as we commonly hear, is a measure of all goods and services produced inside a country. So a GDP to grow, economic activity also has to grow. So it's an important integral part of any economy. And it is this very activity that is slowing down in India since the beginning of 2019. the fourth quarter of 2018 and 19, there was a dip of 5.8%. Now, expectations for the quarter of 2019-20 also does not look very good. In fact, a further dip is expected around 5.6%. We will be talking to economist Mr. Arun Kumar from Delhi about what this really means in terms of the kind of situation unfolding in India, not just geopolitically, but also economically. Mr. Arun Kumar, thank you for joining us here. Let me, right at the start of this, get to the main point. What are the economic indicators and what are they saying for India?
So, at this point of time, you have a decline in demand for automobiles, which is one of the biggest decline since about the last 20 years. You have a decline in the rate of growth of the FMCG sector. You have a decline in the core sector growth, which measures the infrastructure growth. You have a decline in, freight traffic, air traffic, and so on, which has all add up to, a declining rate of growth of GDP. Now, the official rate of GDP growth does not include the unorganized sector, or rather it includes in a way which doesn't quite measure the growth of the unorganized sector. And unorganized sector is 45% of GDP and 94% of the employment. Now, if you were to include that, the rate of growth would be even lower than 5.8% that was measured for the previous quarter for which the data came. So now it's expected that the rate of growth would be even less. So it might be more like 5.3% officially. But if you include the unorganized sector, it may be much lower than that. There was also a controversy because the former chief economic advisor argued that in the last 5 years, the rate of growth is overestimated by 2.5%. And that also did not include the unorganized sector. So if you were to go by the former chief economic advisor's data, then the rate of growth would be closer to something like 3.5% rather than even 5.8%. So in other words, the economy is facing severe headwinds, in spite of the fact that the interest rates have been cut 4 times by the Reserve Bank of India, and the stock markets were ruling very high till recently. The instability is only reflected recently. So in spite of the kind of boom that should have taken place because of interest rate cut, because of the stock market doing well, the Indian economy's organized sectors not doing so well, and the unorganized sectors decidedly doing rather poorly since the time of demonetization 3 years back. So all told, the government is very worried. The Reserve Bank of India has also sounded caution, and the economists have been sounding caution for the last 2 years.
We've also heard just recently the former governor of RBI come out and say that it's very worrisome, the kind of situation that the Indian economy is at. And you've talked about how the government has made moves of cutting the interest rates at least 4 times, but the situation doesn't seem to be getting better. In fact, there are reports from top auto industry bodies that jobs as many as 2.300,000 jobs have been lost in the auto industry. Do you think the government of India is paying enough attention to what punitive measures need to be taken to address this?
Government of India, of course, is trying to do, but first it must admit the problem. Government has not been admitting the problem for the last few years. Government keeps saying that India is the fastest growing economy in the world, growing at about 7%. That's why in the budget, it estimated that the rate of growth would be 12%, whereas even officially it's running at about 7% at the moment. And that's why revenues were being short. And to maintain the fiscal deficit, the government cut back expenditure, which led to a further slowdown in the economy. So the government now is focusing on the automobile sector and other sectors. They're demanding a cut in tax rates, the GST tax, which is applicable to the automobile sector. But my argument is that the problem did not begin with the organized sector. It began with the unorganized sector after demonetization. So what needs to be done is to give a boost to the unorganized sector, which is 45% of the employment. If that is not done, then the problem will continue.
Right, but Mr. Kumar, let me ask you this. What would you attribute this slowdown to?
So I would attribute the slowdown to the fact that the unorganized sector has been a declining sector for the last 3 years after demonetization, because demonetization impacted the unorganized sector.
And the demonetization, sorry to cut you there, Mr. Kumar, I just want to spell this out for the viewership here to understand. Demonetization was initiated by the BJP government during the first tenure, correct?
Yes, in 2016, that was initiated in 2016. November 8th. And that led to an impact on the unorganized sector because the unorganized sector works in cash. And when cash was short, this problem came up. And then after that, GST came 8 months after that, and the GST is again something that the unorganized sector is unable to work with, and they again suffered. So there were two big shocks. And then the third shock came from the NBFC sector, which is in a crisis. So the banking sector has large NPAs, and also the NBFC sector from which the unorganized sector used to get loans, they also came into problem. So there have been three big shocks to the economy in the last 3 years, because of which the unorganized sector went into a crisis, and that now manifested itself in the organized sector as well. So the demand shortage that originated there has gone into the organized sector, and the government has been cutting back expenditure to meet fiscal deficit target. So that has further impacted the unorganized sector and the organized sector as well. So all told, if the government doesn't admit the crisis, the solutions would also not be found for the problem.
So acknowledging is one thing, but stay with us, Mr. Kumar. I want to come back to you and talk to you more on this. But let me introduce another guest who's just joining us. Dr. Ashok Dhawale is the president of All India Kisan Sabha Delhi. Dr. Ashok, you heard Mr. Kumar talk about how the unorganized sector is essentially what triggered these sort of slowdown of economy. And we are seeing this not just from this year alone, but in fact, it started as far back as in 2016, those three big shocks. Tell us a little about the representation that you do of the Kisans, of the farmers, and the kind of impact the slowdown has had on the agricultural side of it.
Yeah. Today, the agricultural side is in the worst ever crisis ever since independence. This is because now 2 or 3 factors, if you just count in, ever since these neoliberal policies began, there have been more than 300,000 suicides by peasants, farmers in the country. And this is something extremely shocking, extremely unprecedented. In the last 1 year alone, there have been more than 16 to 17,000 farmer suicides. Most of these suicides are because of indebtedness, because the farmers cannot meet their debt obligations, and that is as a result of it, due to all social pressures, etc., they are ending their lives. I think this is the biggest tragedy that has befallen India in the last several years, even after independence.
Right.
Mr. Kumar was very right when he talked about these 3 points. I support him on those. All this situation has come about in the entire economy as such, including the urban and the rural, because of the question of demonetization, because of this hasty implementation of the GST, and because of these non-performing assets by many of the big capitalists who have actually fleeced the banks of thousands of crores of rupees. So that is right. But as far as the agrarian sector is concerned, there were 2 promises made by the Narendra Modi regime when it came to power in 2014. Both of them were very important, but both of them were totally betrayed.
Okay.
Which were these 2 promises? Number 1, they will effect a complete loan waiver to farmers all over India. Because of this question of farmer suicides, which is burgeoning, they said they will do a loan waiver to all the farmers.
Right.
The second important thing that they promised was that we will see that after the loan waiver also, the issue should not go back to square one. So therefore, they had said that we will give them remunerative price at 1.5 times the cost of production, which is the recommendation of the National Commission on Farmers, which was headed by a very, very great agricultural scientist of India, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan.
Okay.
Now, both these promises have been betrayed.
So they've not been met. They've not been met in the past 5 years. I'm going to just bring in Mr. Kumar here. The kind of the agricultural sector has taken, in your opinion, if I could get your comments, the BJP election manifesto back in 2014 had promised 50% profits on the production cost for farmers. And again, in 2019 election manifesto, they again promised that by 2022, they would double the farm incomes. Do you think these are the kind of policies that would never possible to have met and gave false hope, considering the numbers that not just the National Crime Records Bureau is stating is shocking, 300,000 suicides since 1995.
So, you're right that the farming sector is in a crisis. And as I've been arguing, if you hit 94% of the employment, then incomes come down for a majority, and that would lead to a decline in the demand for foods, and therefore the food stocks are built up. And when that happens, then the price of agricultural commodities drops, and the government of India doesn't have a mechanism to introduce support the minimum support price mechanism that they have, and that's why the farmers are not getting the minimum support price, even though the minimum support price is way below what the Swaminathan Committee's recommendation was of 50% above the full cost.
Okay.
The government keeps saying that we are giving 50% above cost, but it's not the full cost that they are calculating.
Right.
And that's why, it's unlikely that you'll be able to double in farm incomes by 2022.
So he wasn't being, since we're running out of time, and I really get this last comment in from you, Mr. Kumar. Now, you're talking about they weren't very realistic at a time that India's economy didn't even have the mechanism to cope with this, considering the 95% employment. But let me also ask you about the investor confidence. Where is it at this point, especially considering that relations with the neighbor Pakistan, a nuclear armed state, are at its very low. Escalations, tensions are very high. We're even seeing the very well-to-do people in India deterring away from investments. Is there a problem here that needs to be addressed?
So, as I said, because of the decline in the economy's demand, capacity utilization as per the Reserve Bank of India's data has been running at 75% and less than that. So investment has been down, and in the recent quarter, investment was down further because of the kind of uncertainty and the decline in the various sectors of the economy. Similarly, new project starts have been down, and the completion of old projects has also been down. So all that suggests that the investment in the economy has been down in spite of interest rate cut, in spite of the stock market being at a high in the last 6 months.
Right.
So what it suggests is that the investment climate is not
I'm so sorry,
right.
Mr. Kumar, we'll have stop you there. We've run out of time talking about India's economy, where it stands and how the geopolitical relations are either affecting it or diversing the attention away from the situation on hand. With that, we've come to the end of the show. We will see you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.